Alright, what's going on guys? It's Rest, and in this video, I want to go over all of Amara's class mods and rank them on a tier list. Now, I haven't done one of these in a while, but I have done these before in the past, and you guys do seem to love them. And now that we're really late on into Borderlands 3, these are pretty much probably the last class mods we're going to be getting, so this is going to be a nice rating with everything we have in the game. Obviously, if they do come out with another one, I will add this on here as well. But as of right now, this is probably going to be our last class mods that we see in the game for Borderlands 3. So as always, these are my opinions, and if you have any other opinions yourself, be sure to let me know in the comments where you think something might go, where I might have put something wrong, because if you like something, obviously I might not like it as much, but this can just be a general video and we can have discussions on Amara's class mods. So if you do enjoy this, consider subscribing and dropping a like. It really helps me out and our channel grow by getting these videos out there for everyone to see. I truly appreciate it. But with all that, let's jump right into the first class mod, and that is the Golden Rule. Now, before I rank it, I'm going to give you a little rundown of what the Golden Rule actually does and the skills it provides. So the Golden Rule says whenever an enemy damages Amara, she gains increased axe skill cooldown rate for a few seconds. This effect stacked, and the skills you're going to get from this are Mindfulness, Helping Hands, and Laid Bare. Now, the actual legendary effect of the class mod itself is not the greatest due to the fact you have something like the Phase Zerker in the game, but it isn't awful, so to speak. And it will work, but it really requires you to take damage. But the skills that you get from it does complement that playstyle, as in you get mindfulness, you get movement speed, you get helping hands, you get damage reduction. And then Laid Bare is also going to apply debuffs whenever your axe skill hits enemies. So obviously, if your axe skill is cooling down a lot, you're going to be applying debuffs to a lot of enemies. The problem with this class mod is, like I said, it's kind of just a worse Phase Zerker in a way. It is a different playstyle, but you can pretty much accomplish everything with the Phase Zerker that the Golden Rule can do, and you don't even have to worry about taking damage. Plus, you get additional benefits like extra damage as well. Now, you can get some crazy stacks of this cooldown rate with the Golden Rule, but also another problem is that since you're taking damage, and if you have the Guardian rank skill topped off, so when your shields are full, you're going to get like 200% increased cooldown rate. This is kind of just negating that. You're not going to get topped off, and you're really relying on your class mod to give you that cooldown rate, and it's really not worth that trade-off. So in my opinion, I honestly would rate the Golden Rule D. It's not F tier because you definitely can make it work, but it is pretty bad just because it's outshone by a lot of other stuff in the game. But now moving on to the Phase Zerker, we're starting off strong. We're going to get one of the best class mods out the way, and I think we all know where the Phase Zerker is going to go. But before, let's read what it does. And it says, on axe skill used, Amara gains her max rust stacks count, but they decay over time. Amara gains 2% weapon damage and 1% axe skill cooldown rate per rush stack, and she also gets a maximum +5 rush stacks as well. You get a lot of stuff with just this one class mod, and the skills you get are going to be Anima, Clarity, and Conflux. Now, the skills are not the greatest. On something like the Golden Rule, like I was saying, the skills are definitely better. Anima is okay. Clarity is pretty much worthless because if you're playing Phase Zerker, you're going down red skill tree anyway, and you're going to get sustainment. And then Conflux can be okay to apply things like Armageddon or anything like that, but it's still not the greatest. But even with the skills being the weakest on the class mod, the legendary effect itself is insanely good. If you're playing a rush stack focused build, which most Amara players are, you're going to have max rush stacks at all times, which gives you an insane amount of benefits. And on top of that, with the class mod itself, you're also getting damage and cooldown rate. Like I was saying earlier with the Golden Rule, you can achieve everything like that with the Phase Zerker, and you don't even have to worry about damaging yourself. And on top of that, you can run the Phase Zerker in literally almost any build. You can run the Phase Zerker in a melee build if you want to, and it will still perform very well. And for that reason, it is going to go into the S tier spot. It is literally just her best class mod in the game. You might could argue that, you know, other stuff might have a little bit more damage output, but just pure use wise between damage, cooldown rate, everything just all around, even if you want to account for the skills as well, like Anima is not bad. Like I was saying, it is just the best class mod in the game for Amara. Now, moving on to the next one, we have the Kinsei. Now, the Kinsei is an interesting one, and it reads, after activating her axe skill, Amara deals 10% bonus melee damage of her tuned element type with her weapons for the next 6 seconds. This legendary effect is actually really good, and when I was just talking about out damaging the Phase Zerker, this is actually the class mod that can do it for 6 seconds. That is the problem. It is a very short time to actually achieve that damage, and the melee damage you get is kind of weird in a way. It doesn't actually apply like on hit melee effects, like you're not going to get like cut purse from this, but it does incorporate all your melee damage bonuses. So if you have a lot of melee damage and you put on the right axe skill element based on whatever boss you're fighting, like, you know, Incinerate for Grave Ward, you can absolutely destroy with this class mod. Now, the skills you're going to get are Unweave the Rainbow, Joyful Freedom, and No Mistakes Nature. Joyful Freedom and No Mistakes Nature are really good for the melee part of the skill tree, and then Unweave the Rainbow you can actually just crazy stuff with too, because when you freeze enemies, you get a bunch of like splash damage bonuses, and you can obliterate enemies. There's some cool builds you can do with it. Overall, this is one of Amara's best class mods as well. It has some very, very unique playstyles. And on top of that, if you remember back in the old days of Borderlands 3, you can actually fake grass the ground to proc this, and you don't ever actually have to use your active skill. If you have face grass equipped, just do it on the ground. You're going to get this damage bonus. Really, really cool. I honestly don't know if I would rate this S tier. I think I might put it in the A tier, but it does rival something like the Phase Zerker, but I do not think personally that it is better than the Phase Zerker. Like I said, you can't get a smidge amount of more damage if you play it right, but the way you have to play it, I don't think it's worth it overall. Just for the Phase Zerker, you can kind of just run whatever and you can do literally everything the best in the game. Now moving on to the Death's Blessing. This is another new class mod that we've recently got, and this reads: on kill from Remnant Orb, spawn a Blessed Orb that increases Amara's weapon damage by 150% for 20 seconds. That is a huge damage increase for a long period of time, and all you have to do is get a Remnant kill. And Remnant kills are very, very easy to come by now in the game. And the skills you get from this are Remnant, Wrath, and Atman. All these are really, really good for this playstyle. Wrath is obviously just a damage increase. Remnant is obviously good because you can actually proc the legendary effect of the class mod. And then Atman is going to increase all your action skill damage, which is also pretty decent. This is an interesting one as well. It's kind of like the Kinsei. It's not good for bossing whatsoever unless you can actually get a kill with Remnant before you go into a boss fight. But for mobbing scenarios, though, it's actually really, really good because obviously Remnant is going to easily kill any other enemy. You're going to have 150% damage increase for 20 seconds, and you can just keep proccing it over and over again once that 20-second timer eventually does run out. I know a lot of people love this class mod. I personally don't ever really run it, but that doesn't mean that it's not a bad class mod in any way, because it is one of her best, but it is a very situational one of her best. Something like the Kinsei, like I said, it kind of relies like a build to play around. The Death Blessing does not, being the fact that Remnant does just come on the class mod. You don't even have to spec into Blue Tree to get Remnant if you don't want to, and you can still take advantage of this class mod. This is just a overall very, very good mobbing class mod for Amara. And if you, like I said, if you can't proc it before you go into a boss fight, it's really good for that as well. And for that, I'm going to give it A tier because, again, these two class mods just seem like they took the Phase Zerker, kind of like split them in half, and they're really, really good because obviously they come from the Phase Zerker, but they do their own thing really, really niche. Like Kinsei is good for bossing, and Death Blessing is really good for act clear. But if you combine those together, you get the Phase Zerker. Sure, the Death Blessings might be a little bit better for mobbing situations compared to the Phase Zerker, and Kinsei might be a little bit better for bossing situations compared to the Phase Zerker, but the Phase Zerker is not like that far off from both of those two, and it can do both of them combined together, and that's why I think the Phase Zerker is overall just the best class mod for Amara. Next up, we have the Muse class mod, and this reads: whenever Amara damages an enemy with a melee attack, she projects melee damage outwards of her attuned element towards another nearby enemy. This skill has a short cooldown. So this legendary effect is essentially just giving an additional skill for Amara. You're gonna basically be able to have like a ranged melee type thing whenever you punch an enemy, which can pretty much most of the time go out and insta kill another enemy, which is really, really nice. And the skills you get from this are Late Bear, Jab Cross, and Illuminated Fist. Obviously, for a melee focused class mod, Illuminated Fist is really, really good to have. Late Bear is definitely a very interesting one to have on there, and Jab Cross isn't bad. They really want you to play into using your action skill to do a lot of damage, apply a debuff, and then finish them off with Illuminated Fist, and then your other little orb go out and kill another enemy. Muse used to be one of the best class mods in the game, especially for melee builds, but they ended up changing it a good amount, and it's nowhere as strong as it used to be. Also, when it first came out, there was a bug where you could get +3 in Illuminated Fist to really increase that damage, but now you can no longer get that +3, so it's kind of hard to recommend the Muse, being that they have changed it. But don't get me wrong, it's still really good, and I still think, like, if you want to go for a melee build with the Muse, it is still 100% viable. It's just that the skills you get from it aren't the greatest, so to speak, based on the build, but I'm going to rank it in C tier. I definitely think the Breaker down here is a better melee class mod. Now, again, these are my opinions. If you think the Muse is better, let me know in the comments. But I honestly never run the Muse anymore for melee focused builds, like, at all. If anything, I run the Phase Zerker more than the Muse due to the way they changed it. But I honestly think it is still decent, and that's why I'm putting it in C tier. Kind of in the middle, and that's where I'll leave it. But going on to the Nimbus now, the Nimbus reads: whenever Amara first damages an enemy with her action skill, she creates a damaging cloud of her action skill element at that location, and the cloud damage is +25 a second. So the way the cloud damage works is based on whatever your dot damage is on your weapon that you're holding. So if you're holding a gun that has an insane damage over time stat, this cloud can actually do a lot of damage. There used to be builds back in the day where you could actually use this cloud to like insta kill bosses. It doesn't work as well anymore, but you still can achieve it, and the skills you get from this are pretty good as well. You get Violent Tapestry, Conflux, and Tempest. Violent Tapestry is obviously really good for applying that status effect element, so you can get that ton of damage. Conflux again is okay, and then Tempest is really, really good. Tempest is one of Amara's best skills, so you get a class mod that can actually roll with Tempest, and you can get +5 in it. You can get a bunch of elemental damage going on for you. Just with that alone, the class mod is really good in itself, but obviously if you add on its legendary effect, it is also really, really good as well. For mobbing scenarios, the Cloud is not the greatest in the slightest, because obviously it can only apply one time. If you have like a phase cast go out and hit multiple enemies, it's only going to apply a Cloud on that first target. I think the way they should change it is that whenever your axe skill does hit enemies, it can apply clouds whenever, because the Cloud like doesn't do an insane amount of damage, especially way into Mayhem 11 now, but it still does like a decent amount. And I think you could really buff this class mod if you do change it in that way. But again, with Tempest rolling on it, it is really good. And I honestly debating it either putting in C or B tier, because I definitely think there is a little bit more use out of it than the Muse, due to the fact, like I said, it has Tempest. You can kind of use it in pretty much any build, but it isn't the greatest with that legendary effect. But you can make it work if you really play into it. I honestly think I'm going to rate it in B tier due to that reason. I know some people that actually really love running the Nimbus class mod, and it is very fun. It's just not like the greatest in the game, so to speak, but it definitely is better than the golden rule, and in my opinion, I think it is a little bit better than the Muse. Alright, now moving on to the Breaker, the other melee class mod. This reads: Amara gains damage reduction. This bonus is based on the distance to the enemy. The closer to the enemy, the greater the bonus. Damage reduction up to 29%. So that is the legendary effect, and the skills you get are Personal Space, Fire Center, and Jab Cross. Personal Space is actually really good with this class mod, because obviously this skill is going to give you more damage the closer you are to the enemy. The legendary effect of the class mod lets you get damage reduction the closer you are to the enemy, so you're going to get a lot of bonuses just when you're up close to enemies. You want to be up close and personal with this and taking a lot of damage. Fire Center is going to give you additional 100% bonus melee damage, especially if you have a point spec into it. You get 200%, and you get an absurd amount of melee damage. Jab Cross is also going to give you some axe skill damage whenever you melee an enemy. So if you run something like a face puncher with the Breaker combined together, you can start getting some crazy axe skill damage out with this thing. And if you run a shotgun base build with Personal Space, you can do some crazy damage numbers as well. But for the most part, people are running the Breaker for melee based builds. You get a good amount of damage reduction so you can live. You get that nice melee damage bonus with Find Your Center, and you can do some crazy things with it. I honestly will rate the Breaker in B tier. It's definitely not the best of the best class mods in the game, like whatsoever. I honestly think running the Phaserker for melee build still can technically be a little bit better than the Breaker or Muse, but you know, run what you want to run. Breaker is obviously probably going to be your best option, but that is why I'm putting it in the B tier. Now, next up, we have the Spiritual Driver. The Spiritual Driver is another interesting one, because when it first came out, it was insanely good. They ended up changing it to make it a little bit worse. It's still really good though. But the problem is that the Spiritual Driver is actually hard to use. It reads: whenever Amara activates her axe skill, she applies her axe skill element to herself. Amara's gun damage is increased while moving. The quicker she moves, the greater the gun damage bonus. So this class mod is based all around making you just run super fast and doing a ton of damage while you're moving really fast. And to help with that, the skills you're going to get are Mindfulness, Help Enhance, and Clarity. Clarity obviously is going to help you regen some health since you are damaging yourself with your attuned element. Help Enhance is going to give you damage reduction to help keep you alive, and then Mindfulness is going to give you even more movement speed. Due to the fact the way the skill works, when you take damage, you get movement speed. This class mod synergizes so well with each other with the skills that they provide, but it is a very difficult class mod to use. If you are the Shroud of Borderlands, you can absolutely make this thing work. If you can hit literally all your shots with any weapon in the game while you're moving at light speed, you can do some absurd things with the Spiritual Driver. But in reality, most people aren't going to be like that, and it's just a very interesting class mod, because it still is like one of the best in the game. I don't think it is S tier though. I know most people would probably consider it S tier, but I think the playstyle that's behind it is just not worthy of the S tier spot. If you can make it work, you can happily put it in S tier in my opinion, but it's just not a fun enough playstyle to try to get into just for the outcome. Like, again, we're going to go back to the Phaserker. The Phaserker is insanely easy to use. Anyone can pick it up, and you can pretty much get close to the same results as the Spiritual Driver, and you have to put way more work into the Spiritual Driver than you do the Phaserker. The Phaserker, you click one button and boom. The Spiritual Driver, you have to, you know, constantly keep spamming your action skill over and over again. And since you're taking damage, you're not proccing things like topped off. Since your shield is going down, you're going to have low cooldown rate, and it's just a mess to try to work around with. But if you can, it is really good, and I will put it in the 8 tier for that. Kinsei, Death Blessing, and Spiritual Driver, I think all are definitely deserving of the 8 tier spot, because they're all really good. They just do not have the oomph that the Phase Circle has, though, and I think most of you probably will agree with that. But now we're moving on to the Elementalist. And as you see, we saved the best 3 for last. You have the Elementalist, Stone, and Dragon down here. But the Elementalist reads, whenever Amara phase grasps an enemy, her action skill elements is applied to all nearby enemies. This legendary effect is honestly worthless. It's so bad. The actual elemental effects you apply to other enemies do little to no damage, and I honestly don't even think cryo will apply to other enemies if you run the cryo action skill element. So you are stuck with shock, incinerate, and corrosive, and the damage you get from those aren't even the best. You can make a very interesting little niche build that I have a video on in the past where you really focus on things like Armageddon. But honestly, the most appealing to this class mod is the skills you get, which is Infusion, Wildfire, and Violent Tapestry. Wildfire will help spread elements, which is nice. Violent Tapestry is going to help proc those elemental status effects. With Infusion, you can get plus 5 points in it. And if you also have plus 5 points in the skill itself, you can get 10 points in it, obviously, and it converts 80% of your damage based on what your axe skill element is. So you can have something like a Hellwalker that obviously is always incinerary, actually do like 80% corrosive damage, which is really cool, and essentially just makes it a corrosive shotgun. That is really the only like benefit to the Elementalist there is. The legendary effect, like I said, is completely worthless. You're really just focusing on Infusion, and you can just get Infusion on a purple class mod. So for that reason, I am going to rate it in the F tier. It is not good in the slightest. It is like honestly abysmal, that legendary effect. It has needed a buff for so long, and if they do ever end up buffing it, I will change this up. But this is where it stands right now, and and like I said, it's needed one for so long, I don't know if it's actually ever going to get one. Now moving on to the Stone class mod. This one reads, whenever Amara is damaged, she gains a plus 10% chance to gain a stack of Rush. For every stack of Rush, Amara gains a 3% damage reduction, and she gets an additional 5 Rush stacks, just like the Phase Zerker. Now the skills you get from this are Do Harm, Violent Tapestry, and Awakening, and this class mod is honestly not too bad. The damage reduction you get is nice for survivability. You have to really keep your rush stacks up though, and that makes the playstyle of this really weird, because the skills that you're getting want you to use your action skill, consume your rush stacks, do more damage, things like that. But the legendary effect itself wants you to keep your rush stacks, not consume them, so you get the damage reduction. The effect and the skills do not go hand in hand whatsoever. But honestly, a very interesting thing you can do is something like the Phase Zerker. You can fake grass the ground to get a bunch of Do Harm stacks up. Switch to the Stone to increase your axe skill damage if you have a bunch of points in Do Harm, and you could do some crazy damage numbers with it. Now, obviously, that is something not a lot of people are going to do, and it's really not that practical in the first place. But if you want to, that is where the Stone class mod is going to be good. And that's honestly really the only reason you would ever run it. If you do need damage reduction, this legendary effect is better than the Elementalist. At least it actually does seem to do something, unlike the Elementalist. So for that reason, I am going to rate it in the D tier, because it is very niche. You're never really ever going to run it, but you know, it is better than the Elementalist. Now finally, we have the Dragon class mod. The Dragon class mod is what used to be one of the worst looked down upon, like with the Elementalist, and I don't want to say like it's moved up in the ranks, because it really hasn't, but it's just not the greatest. But it reads, whenever Amara kills an enemy with a melee attack, her axe skill augment is triggered. And the skills you get are Do Harm, Restless, and Remnant. Remnant, we've already talked about, very good skill. That alone can make the class mod decent. Restless is going to give you more cooldown rate, but Restless isn't that good due to the fact that literally, you know, to have things like Top Dolphin, Phase Zerker. And Do Harm obviously is also going to give you some axe skill damage, which you can do something like the Stone, where you can swap to it and get some bonus damage. But the Stone is better than that, because you can also roll things like Awakening. Now the problem with this class mod is that on paper it reads to be really good, because you think like, oh, Amara's axe skill augments only work when she uses her axe skill. Axe skills have like a long cooldown, so this would be good if you just get a melee kill. You can always apply the augments, and yes, you would be correct. But the augments on Amara are so beyond worthless, honestly. Like you really don't ever really need it. If you take a look at something like Soul Sap, you don't really need that, because you have things like Sustainment. Like, it's just kind of a waste. Half of the little augments don't even work, or they have a short cooldown. Like, you can't spam them over and over again. Like, Stillness of Mind only works a little bit of the time. Like, it has like a little internal cooldown from my testing. And the only one that works constantly over and over again is Revelation. And that is when your actual hits enemy, it does that little small amount of Nova damage. So your melee kills just apply Novas, but the damage that you get from the Novas aren't even that good. So it's very hard to recommend the Dragon class mod. I think if they ever do buff for augments, though, you could really see this, because this does work with things like the Face Puncher, and you can make some things work. And even if it worked with things like Expedite, you get some more cooldown rate. But overall, it's just not good where it stands in the game. And I literally don't think I would ever run it over any other melee class mod. And for that reason, I am going to rank it in the F tier spot. Now, I know some of you guys probably don't think the dragon deserves F tier, because I know some people actually really like the dragon. I would love to know the type of builds you run with it down below, because I seem to like not be able to find anything with it. Obviously, you can make some like kind of niche builds with it, but they're not going to be the greatest in the game. And this is the tier list. I think, in my opinion, that this is a pretty accurate tier list of Amara's actual class mods and their utility. Berserker obviously is insanely good. Kinsei Death Rest and Spirit Driver really good, just a little bit harder to use than the Berserker. Nimbus Breaker are pretty good as well. Muse is kind of average. It's nothing too great. Golden Rule Stone is pretty bad, but you can make them work a little bit better than the Elementalist and Dragon, because those are just kind of worthless. And the ones down here, the 4 down here, really need a change or a buff if they want to even get close to up here. And if they revert the Muse, I definitely think the Muse could go back to something like A, maybe even B tier spot. But that is going to do it for this tier list. I really did hope you guys enjoyed this. I know this is a longer video, but I wanted to go in depth, talk about all these class mods, again, so you guys know what you can run. But anyway, that is going to do all for me. Thank you all so much for watching. If you did make it this far in the video, remember, be sure to drop a like, but I will see you in the next one. Peace.